Welcome to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. For developing a long-lasting, happy relationship is the status symbol to achieve, and following my tools is one path to help get you there. I'm your host, Dr. Wyatt Fisher, a licensed psychologist specializing in couples counseling. If you want to improve your communication so that you have more love and less conflicts, download my app today, Keep the Glow, KTG, wherever you get your apps, and start with 2 weeks free. Also, be sure to click the subscribe button for future episodes and follow me on social at Dr. Wyatt Fisher. I invite you to join me in my free masterclass September 4th at 12 noon or 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on how to rebuild your marriage in 90 days. In this masterclass, we're going to cover top causes of communication problems, top causes of resentments, top causes of emotional and sexual problems, and top solutions to reduce conflicts and increase your love. That applies to everybody. And so you better attend. I'm doing this for you. It's free. It's September 4th, and it's how to rebuild your marriage in 90 days. To sign up, go to the show notes, click the link, and I hope to see you there. So today I'm talking about 3 steps to reduce defensiveness. Do you tend to be defensive? You're not alone. A lot of people struggle being defensive, and it's a common complaint. A lot of couples that I see, they'll complain and say, my partner is so defensive. They just can't take any ownership. No matter what I say, they get defensive. And it's a constant frustration. It's a constant problem in relationships. And there's some solutions. So today I'm going to go through the solutions for how you can become less defensive. So maybe you struggle with defensiveness, or maybe you're married to someone who struggles with defensiveness, but make sure you listen to this with your partner if defensiveness is an issue in your relationship. Number 1, ask for feedback. Part of the reason you get defensive is because you're blindsided with a complaint. And part of the reason you're blindsided with a complaint is because you don't regularly ask for constructive feedback. This is why I've created the bullseye question. The bullseye question is once a day you ask your partner, what's one thing I did right today and what's one thing I could have done better? You're asking for feedback. And when we ask for feedback, we're coming from a position of power psychologically because we're asking. Therefore, when we receive the feedback, we're not going to be as defensive because I just asked for the feedback. So if I ask you, what could I have done better? And you tell me, I'm less likely to get defensive because I just asked you for that feedback. So that's one key pivot. How often do you ask your partner for constructive feedback on how you can improve? You probably rarely, if ever, ask for feedback. And because you don't ask for feedback, your partner gets fed up with your difficult behaviors, and then they blindside you with a complaint, and then you get defensive, and then they feel invalidated, and now we're having a conflict. So if you want to reduce your defensiveness, if you want to become less defensive in general, start asking for feedback, because when you ask for feedback, you're going to be coming at it from a different position. It's going to feel less threatening, and so you're less likely to get defensive. And it's going to give your partner hope. If they can start feeling like they can give you feedback without you getting defensive, that's going to give them hope. That's going to make them feel like they can share. That's going to make them feel like it's safe for them to really open up with where they're struggling in the relationship. But if you get defensive all the time, that's going to make them stuff down their feelings, and they're going to feel unsafe to share. And then they're going to be more likely to explode or just randomly blindside you with a complaint. Number 2, the rebuttal needs to happen in your head. If you remember the bullseye question, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing me talk about the bullseye question, when you receive constructive feedback, the ground rule is you have to say, thank you for the feedback. And then inside of your head, you have 3 buckets to choose from. The one bucket is the fluke bucket. This means what my partner just said about me was completely out of my control. It was all circumstantial. So I'm going to put it in the fluke bucket. Okay? That's something that's going on inside my head. That's a rebuttal going on inside of my mind. I'm putting in the fluke bucket. I don't say that out loud. Fluke bucket. That wouldn't go well. But in my mind, I'm thinking, what they just said, I could have done better. That was out of my control. That was nothing I could have done better. That was a one-off. I've never heard this feedback before. So I'm putting it in the fluke bucket. Now, ethically, if your partner gives you the same feedback over and over, you can't keep putting it in the fluke bucket because there is a kernel of truth in it. The other rebuttal in your head, and this actually isn't a rebuttal, but this is something else that could happen in your head, is you put it in the bucket that says, all me. And that means what they just said I could have done better is a major growth area for me, and I know it. I got to really work on that. I have to really improve. There's no excuses. That's all me. Okay. That also could happen when you get that feedback. The third thing that can happen when you get feedback, and again, this happens inside your head, the rebuttal happens in your head, not out loud. The third thing that can happen in your head when you get feedback is the bucket that says partially me. And what that bucket says is the feedback I just received. Some of the reason I had that behavior is because of circumstances that were beyond my control. Also, I think my partner has some sensitivities that they're projecting onto me. That's not my fault. However, I do think there's a piece here that is my fault that I could work on. And that's what you're trying to figure out. So when you get constructive feedback, you're rebuttaling inside of your head. You're mulling it over the next day. You're just thinking about it. And when you're thinking about it, what you're doing is you're trying to look for the kernel of truth. Now, think about popcorn. Think about how small a kernel of popcorn is. I love popcorn. I've tried to reduce how much I eat it over the years, but I'm a huge popcorn lover. I love going out to the movies and eating a big bowl of popcorn. So think about the size of a kernel of popcorn. It's teeny. That's what you're searching for. When you get feedback from your partner, first of all, you're asking for feedback, so you're not getting blindsided. And partners, by the way, the only time you're allowed to give constructive feedback is when your partner is daily asking for it. So that's also important. If you're the one that gives unsolicited feedback, follow the bullseye guidelines, and that means you only can give constructive feedback in the bullseye because then there's no blindsiding. So again, you're rebuttaling in your head. You're thinking about which bucket am I going to put it into? All me, fluke bucket, partially me. And what you're doing with those buckets is you're looking for the kernel of truth. And a kernel of popcorn is teeny. So you don't have to own all of this. You don't have to swallow everything your partner is saying about you. But what you do have to do is try to figure out what is the kernel of truth that they're saying about me. What blind spot is it highlighting? What growth area is it reflecting? That's what your partner is for. Your partner is there to refine you, to sharpen you. You are there to refine and sharpen them. And if you're doing it in the way I'm describing, it becomes a beautiful process where you're refining each other. But what happens is we don't ask for the feedback, we get blindsided, and then we feel like there's an expectation that we have to swallow everything our partner just said about us, which we don't. So we push back and we get defensive. And so to do what I'm suggesting sidesteps that power battle. And instead, you ask for the feedback, and then you say, thank you for the feedback. And now I'm mulling it over. I'm looking for the kernel of truth. I'm trying to figure out what can I do to improve here. And this has been a growth area for me as a partner because for many years, my wife and I would take turns blindsiding each other. And she would blindside me at times with complaints. I'd blindside her at times with complaints, and we would both get defensive. And I remember she would blindside me with a complaint, and I wouldn't see it coming, and I would get defensive. And I would tell her all the reasons why what she just said was not my fault. And then I would highlight all the reasons why it was actually her fault. And I was really good at it. I could master that kind of conversation really quickly. And it got me nowhere. It created problems because then my wife felt like I couldn't take any feedback, and I felt like she would just keep blindsiding me. And so I had to finally realize through the years of being married, we've been married 25 years, that I got to do something different. This is not helpful. And that's when I really started developing this concept of the bullseye question where I need to ask for feedback. And then when she gives it to me, I need to say, thank you for the feedback. And then I need to mull it over and look for the kernel of truth. And the moment I started doing that, I realized the majority of the time, there was a kernel of truth. I just had to think it through. I had to critically evaluate myself. And then I started working on those items she would bring up. And then she would see the changes. And that's another tip. When you ask for that feedback and then you say, thank you for the feedback, then you mull over that kernel of truth. It's up to you then to decide, what do you want to do about it? But because no one is cornering you, no one's telling you what to do, that keeps your internal motivation high to do something about it. And that's exactly what happened in our marriage. I would ask for feedback. She would give it. I would say, thank you. I would mull it over. I would figure out the kernel of truth, and then I would put it into action. And that is what you want to do as well. The third step to reduce defensiveness is figuring out, what did you do wrong internally or externally? This is part of the kernel of truth investigation. You're thinking about, what did I do on the inside of my head? What was I thinking that could have been better? Or what did I actually do that could have been better? Now, here's some examples. Some things that you may have been thinking that could have been better could include false expectations, overly high expectations. It could be you had a negative assumption of your partner. You assume the worst in their intent. Those are all things that you can own. Those are all kernels of truth, things that perhaps you did internally. That's maybe the kernel of truth that you can own. Externally, maybe you said something that wasn't very sensitive. Maybe you did something that was a little harsh or not very considerate or not very gentle. But that's one way to think about this kernel of truth. What was I doing internally? That's my mindset. And what was I doing externally? That's my behavior. I need to evaluate myself along that continuum of internal factors and external factors as I'm searching for the kernel of truth, the thing that I can take from this, the thing that I know I probably should work on and get better at. That's what you're looking for. So that's number 3, internal and external. Number 4 is fill up your partner's bucket. This is the love bucket tool where I talk about filling up your partner's love bucket, learning to fill up their bucket with the things they need to feel loved and satisfied while you stop draining it. And you do that long enough and their love bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller until it's filled. That's the power of the love buckets. That's what my app does for you. Keep the glow. So the way this is related to defensiveness is because the more full you keep your partner's love bucket, the more grace they're going to have toward your missteps. Because when their love bucket gets fuller, they're going to feel happier in the marriage. They're going to feel more positive toward you. Therefore, they're going to have more grace so that when you do have a misstep, which is inevitable, you're human, they're going to have more grace toward your misstep, which means they're going to have less constructive feedback, which means there's going to be less time for you to even need to get defensive. There's going to be less complaints. And so that's a fourth way to reduce defensiveness is you learn to fill up your partner's bucket. The higher their bucket, the more loved they're going to feel, the more grace they're going to have toward you, which means less constructive feedback. So those are 4 steps to reduce defensiveness. Number 1, ask for feedback. Number 2, rebuttal in your head. Number 3, reflect on the internal and the external factors that you can own. Look for the kernel of truth. Number 4, fill up your partner's love bucket. Thank you for listening to the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review. The more you leave reviews, the more it tells the algorithm that this is helping people, and so they'll show it to more couples. It's a wonderful way to pay it forward if you find this podcast helpful. Also, you can share the podcast. Just click on the share button and send it to any family or friends that you think would also benefit from this episode. And if you're ready to level up your relationship, if you want to learn my tools, join Marriage Saver Society. Marriage Saver Society is my leading digital course you watch from the comfort of your living room at your own pace. In that course, you're going to learn tools for better emotional intimacy, better physical intimacy, better sharing power approaches, better tools on how to stay in love. So if you're ready to level up your relationship, join Marriage Saver Society. Go to my website, drwyattfisher.com, click on Marriage Saver Society, and grab your spot today. And finally, your marriage is alive. If you care for it and nurture it, it will grow. But But if you deprive it and neglect it, it will wilt and die. The choice is up to you. Take care.